I thought my home was safe. I thought the lock on my door was mine alone. But one afternoon, my camera caught something no one could believe. A shadow at the door, a hand twisting the lock. And when the face turned toward the camera, it wasn't a stranger, it was her, the queen of our HOA, and in her hand was a key that should never exist. What happened next changed the whole neighborhood forever. Welcome back to HOA Stories, where the secrets of suburbia come alive. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs of Texas. I work a regular office job, raise my son, and try to keep peace with the neighbors. But in my neighborhood, peace has a price. And the one who sets that price is the HOA president, a woman who believes every mailbox, every blade of grass, every locked door belongs to her. This is the story of the day she crossed my line, and the Ring camera caught it all. I still remember that day like it just happened yesterday. The sun was out. The street looked calm. Kids were riding their bikes at the end of the cul-de-sac, and everything felt normal. But sometimes the most normal day hides the darkest secret. I was sitting in my living room, working on some boring office emails, when my son came running in. He had that worried look on his face, the one that makes a parent's heart skip a beat. "Dad, someone's at the door," he whispered. I frowned, because we weren't expecting anyone. No packages, no friends coming by, nothing. So I picked up my phone, opened the Ring camera feed, and what I saw froze me in place. There she was, Karen, the HOA president. Her bright pink blouse stood out against the dark green of my front door, and on her chest, that little badge with 3 letters that ruled our neighborhood, HOA. But it wasn't her clothes that caught my attention. It was her hand. Her hand was on my lock, twisting, pressing, trying something. At first, I thought maybe she was just knocking in a strange way. Maybe she was leaving one of her usual nasty notes about trash bins or mailbox paint. But no, this was different. She wasn't knocking. She wasn't writing. She was turning something in my lock, and in the faint glint of the sunlight, I realized what it was. A key. My throat went dry. Why would Karen, the HOA president, have a key to my house, and not just holding it? She was trying it, twisting it like she belonged inside. My son looked at me, his voice shaking. "Dad, is she trying to break in?" I didn't even know what to say, because technically, it wasn't breaking in. It was worse. It was someone who thought they had the right to walk in whenever they pleased. For weeks, maybe months. Karen had been targeting me. It started with letters about my grass being half an inch too tall, then a fine about my trash can being visible for 2 minutes too long, then angry notes about how I didn't attend every HOA meeting. She smiled in public, but the smile never reached her eyes. Behind closed doors, she was a dictator, a queen ruling over driveways and sidewalks, and somehow, she believed that gave her the right to put a key in my door. The camera caught everything, the tilt of her head as she listened for the click of the lock, the smug little smirk as if she was just seconds away from stepping inside. And then, the moment she looked straight into the Ring lens, her eyes widened, her lips parted. She realized she was caught. I could feel my blood boil, but at the same time, a strange chill went down my spine. If we hadn't had that camera, if my son hadn't checked, would she have actually walked into my living room? Would she have pretended it as some inspection, or just claimed she had the right as HOA president? I didn't know. All I knew was that this was war. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The neighborhood always seemed so perfect. Every yard trimmed, every car parked just right, every rule followed like scripture. But now, I started wondering how many other doors Karen had tried, how many locks had she tested with that so-called master key. Was I the first, or just the first one to catch her? The thought kept me awake. Every little sound outside made me glance at the door, and every time I replayed that Ring footage, I noticed something new. The way her fingers gripped the key so naturally, the way she leaned her body against the door like she was used to it, the calmness, as if she'd done this before. I told myself, tomorrow I'd confront her. Tomorrow, I'd demand answers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Confronting Karen was never simple. She had a way of twisting every story, of turning neighbors against each other. If I accused her without proof, she'd smile and say I was paranoid. If I shouted in anger, she'd write a letter to the board about me being unstable. No, the only way to win against Karen was to let the camera speak for itself. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face frozen in the camera lens. That little smirk that vanished the second she realized she was being watched. And I kept asking myself, why my door? Why my lock? Why a key? The morning felt different. The street too quiet. Like everyone knew something they shouldn't. When I stepped outside, Karen was already there. Pink blouse, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect the neighbor's mailbox. She turned her head and smiled at me. That same smile, the one that looked friendly on the surface but never touched her eyes. And in that moment, my hands itched to grab my phone and show her the footage, to expose her, right there in the street. But something stopped me. Because when you deal with someone like Karen, you don't fight fire with fire, you let the fire burn itself out, while you pour gasoline from a safe distance. So I played along, I waved, forced a polite smile, and went back inside. But deep down, I was already planning. I wanted the whole neighborhood to see what she had done. Not just the board, not just her friends, everyone. I called a couple of neighbors I trusted, told them to meet me that evening. We sat in my living room, my son by my side, and I played the footage. The room went silent. You could hear the faint click of her key against my lock, the pause in her breathing as she twisted it, and then the shock on her face when she realized the camera was staring right at her. One of my neighbors whispered, "She did the same at my place once. I thought I was imagining it." Another leaned back in his chair, muttering, "She thinks she owns all of us." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The perfect image of Karen, the queen of the HOA, was beginning to crack. The neighbors who once defended her now sat in silence, realizing they had all been victims of her power trips. It was like pulling a thread from a sweater. Slowly the whole thing was unraveling. But Karen wasn't stupid. The next day, a letter arrived in my mailbox, typed, official-looking, with the HOA logo at the top. Routine Inspection Authority, it read, claiming the board had the right to enter any property for safety purposes. It was signed by Karen herself. No board vote, no signatures, just her name. Her attempt to turn her crime into policy. Her way of saying, "Yes, I tried your lock, and I'll do it again if I want." My blood boiled. Because now, it wasn't just about me. It was about every single family on this street. If she could twist rules too, as easily, what else could she do? Raise fines until people had to move out. Ban someone's dog because she didn't like the barking. Dictate the color of your curtains because they didn't match the aesthetic. I knew then, I couldn't keep this quiet. It wasn't just about protecting my door. It was about protecting the neighborhood from a woman who thought she was above the law, so I made a decision. That night, I uploaded the footage to a private neighborhood group chat, not public, not viral, just neighbors, within minutes. The comments poured in, some in shock, some in denial, but most of them angry, very angry, because for the first time, they saw her mask slip by the next morning. Karen was walking door to door, not with keys, but with excuses. Misunderstanding, she said. Maintenance check, she claimed. But no one was buying it anymore. Her power was slipping, and she could feel it, the look on her face when she saw me across the street. She didn't smile this time. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed, and I realized something chilling. When a person like Karen feels their control fading, they don't give up. They fight harder, dirtier. The neighborhood felt different after that night. Whispers traveled faster than lawnmowers, faster than gossip at the mailbox, and every whisper carried the same name. Karen. She could feel it. I could see it in the way she walked past houses, clipboard hugged tight against her chest, her heels clicking harder on the pavement. Like each step was a fight to keep control. She no longer waved at children playing in the cul-de-sac. She no longer flashed that fake smile at morning joggers. She was watching, measuring, calculating who had turned against her, and she had her sights set on me. The first strike came quietly, a notice in my mailbox. Violation, improper hedge trimming. I stared at it in disbelief. My hedges were cut just last weekend, neat and square, but Karen didn't need truth, she needed paper. With the HOA logo stamped at the top, because once that paper landed in a mailbox, it carried weight. The fine wasn't much, but it wasn't about money. It was about control, a warning shot. I ignored it, hoping she'd see I wasn't rattled, but ignoring Karen was like throwing gasoline on fire. A week later, another notice, this one about noise complaints. I laughed bitterly, because my son and I were quiet as church mice. No parties, no loud music, nothing but homework and TV dinners. But that didn't matter. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to bend, to apologize, to crawl back into silence. I didn't, and that's when things turned darker. I noticed a car parked across the street one night. Headlights off, engine low. It sat there for almost an hour when I finally stepped outside. The car drove away slowly, but not before I caught a glimpse of who was behind the wheel. Karen, sitting in the driver's seat, hands clenched on the wheel, staring at my house like it was her enemy. The next morning, 3 more notices in my mailbox: trash bin placement, mailbox paint, fence height. Each one more ridiculous than the last, each one carrying a fine. I walked over to my neighbor Mark's house. He had lived here longer than anyone. An old veteran with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. When I showed him the stack of letters, he shook his head slowly. "She's done this before," he said. "She picks someone, singles them out, buries them in paper until they break." I asked him how people fought back. He looked down at his coffee mug and whispered, "They don't. Most just sell and leave." Sell and leave. That was the game. Force people out. Buy their silence with exhaustion. Rule the street with fear. But she picked the wrong man this time, because I wasn't leaving. And I had proof. The ring footage was my weapon. My shield. I played it again. That night. Over and over. Memorizing every detail. The way she leaned into the lock. The glint of the key. The flicker of guilt in her eyes when she realized she was caught. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. And I wasn't crazy. Still, fear has a way of creeping in when the lights go out. Every creak of the house made me glance at the door. Every car slowing on the street made me check the blinds. And my son, he started sleeping with his light on. "Dad, what if she comes back?" he asked softly one night. I hugged him tight, told him everything would be okay. But inside, I wasn't so sure. The escalation didn't stop. One morning, a letter arrived not in the mailbox, but taped to my front door. Bold letters across the top. Final warning, Karen's signature at the bottom. She was building her case, trying to paint me as the troublemaker, trying to write me out of the neighborhood one letter at a time. But she underestimated something. The neighbors were watching too when I walked outside. Mrs. Lopez from across the street called out, "I saw her at your door last night again. She was there with a flashlight." My stomach sank. So it wasn't just the camera. She was bold enough to come back. Even after being caught once, that's when I realized. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was obsession. This was power turned into poison. I sat in my kitchen, coffee gone cold, staring at the pile of letters spread across the table, each one a piece of paper, each one another nail in the coffin she was building for me. But I wasn't going to let her bury me. No, I was going to flip the script. That night I made a decision. I would not just defend myself. I would expose her, not quietly in board meetings, not in whispered conversations, but out loud, for everyone to see, because people like Karen, they thrive in silence. They win when neighbors stay scared and quiet, but when the curtain is ripped open, when the spotlight burns down on them, they shrivel. So I gathered every piece of evidence, the ring footage, the stack of letters, the messages from neighbors who had seen her, and I prepared. The next HOA meeting would not be routine. It would be war when the night of the meeting arrived. I walked into that sterile community center with my son by my side. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand, eyes sharp like knives. She smiled when she saw me. But it wasn't the same smile as before. This time, it was the smile of a predator that believes it already won. She started the meeting with her usual speech. Rules, fines, violations. Her words echoed off the walls, cold and rehearsed. But when it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste a single second. I stood, pulled out my phone, and played the footage. The room went silent. Every neighbor leaned forward, every eye locked on the screen. There she was, their president, their queen, caught in the act, twisting a key in my lock. The gasp that followed shook the room. Whispers turned into shouts. Some neighbors demanded answers. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Karen's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, she couldn't twist the story. Couldn't hide behind paper and fines. The evidence was too clear. That night, the tide turned. But a question still haunted me. What would Karen do now? Cornered, exposed, with her kingdom slipping from her hands. The meeting ended in chaos. Neighbors shouting, papers shuffling, chairs scraping against the floor. And at the center of it all, Karen, frozen in her seat, her face pale, her hands gripping the gavel so tight her knuckles turned white. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. I thought the truth would finally set us free. But people like Karen don't crumble in public. They wait, they retreat. And then Tetu, hey, strike back twice as hard. The very next morning, another letter sat on my doorstep, not in the mailbox, not slipped politely inside an envelope, but taped across the glass window of my front door like a warning sign. Violation escalation, it read in bold letters. According to her, I now owed hundreds in fines, grass too tall, hedges too short, garbage can out of line, every excuse she could invent. And at the bottom, her signature, written like a weapon. I tore it down. But the damage was already done, because the same letter appeared on 3 other houses by noon. Neighbors who had clapped the loudest at the meeting. It was her message, her revenge. If you side with him, you suffer that week. The neighborhood turned tense. People stopped waving, stopped chatting at the mailbox. Everyone kept their heads down, because in our little kingdom, speaking against the queen came with punishment. But silence was never my option anymore. I had already stepped into the fire, and I wasn't going to back out now. I started digging through HOA documents, past meeting notes, old budgets tucked into binders that smelled of dust, and what I found made my stomach twist. Karen had been moving money, fines collected, maintenance fees. Small amounts shifted here and there. On paper it looked clean, but the numbers didn't add up, and it all pointed back to her signature. She wasn't just power-hungry, she was greedy. I knew this was bigger than me now. It wasn't just about a key in my lock. It was about the way she had turned the HOA into her personal throne, a throne built on fear and money. But the more I discovered, the more dangerous it became. One evening, while taking out the trash, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was, Karen. No clipboard, no fake smile, just her, standing in the shadows of the street lamp. "You think you're clever," she said softly, her voice low, calm, but sharp, like a knife. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. But this neighborhood is mine. It always will." Her eyes glinted, not with fear, but with promise. A promise that this wasn't over. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, trash bag in my hand, my heart pounding. And then she turned, walked away slowly, heels clicking on the pavement, fading into the night. From that day on, strange things started happening. My mailbox, broken open one morning, letters scattered across the street, a paint scratch across the side of my car, deep enough to sting, but not enough to prove, trash cans kicked over in the middle of the night. Only mine, never anyone else's, small things, petty things. But they added up. A campaign of quiet terror. My son grew restless. "Dad, why is she doing this?" he asked, and I didn't know how to explain. Because how do you tell a child that some adults act worse than children, that some people cling to power so tightly? They'll destroy everything around them to keep it. I wanted to fight back louder, harder, but I also knew, the moment I crossed a line, she would use it against me, so I stayed calm. I documented everything. Every scratch, every broken mailbox, every toppled trash can. I built a folder so thick it could crush her if it fell off a table. And then, another meeting came, this time, She didn't sit pale and quiet. This time, she came armed, papers stacked in front of her, each one claiming I was the problem. Noise complaints, false witnesses, signatures I didn't recognize. She painted me as the villain, the troublemaker, the neighbor who couldn't follow simple rules, and some people believed her. Some shook their heads, whispering behind their hands, because Karen had years of control, years of manipulation. And old habits die hard. But I didn't break. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I simply opened the folder I had built. Photos, screenshots, timelines, and the final page, the bank statements with her signature. The room fell silent again. Only this time, the silence cut deeper. Because now, it wasn't just a key in my lock, it was money missing. Proof of her greed. Karen's face twisted. She slammed her gavel, tried to shout me down, called it fabrication, called it harassment. But the neighbors weren't listening anymore. The board members leaned in, their eyes scanning the papers with growing concern. The Queen's crown was slipping. That night, she left the meeting early, stormed out, her heels echoing like gunshots on the floor, and for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was really over. But I was wrong, because the next day, a police cruiser rolled down our street. 2 officers stepped out, walked up to my door, and asked me about a disturbance complaint. Someone had reported shouting, threats, vandalism, from my address, false reports. Her final weapon. My hands shook as I explained. I showed them the folder, the letters, the footage. The officers listened, exchanged looks, and finally said, "We'll look into this." When they left, I sat on my porch, staring at the sunset bleeding over the rooftops. The war wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. It wasn't just about my lock or my lawn. It was about truth versus lies, proof versus power. And I wondered, how far would she go to protect her throne? How far would she sink before she finally drowned in her own lies? The police cruiser rolling away should have given me peace, but instead, it left a heavier silence, the kind that seeps into walls, into the air, into your bones, because now I knew. Karen wasn't just fighting me with fines or letters, she was willing to twist the law itself. The neighbors felt it too. The cul-de-sac changed overnight. People whispered but avoided eye contact. Lawns still trimmed. Mailboxes still neat. But the smiles were gone. Every house felt like a stage. Curtains drawn. Eyes peeking from behind blinds. And in the middle of it all, Karen walked tall, like a queen who had survived an assassination attempt. And come back stronger, she started holding walkthroughs of the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, sunglasses covering her eyes, pointing at houses like soldiers in her private army. She scribbled notes furiously, muttering words like violations and infractions. And behind her, 2 board members followed quietly, men who once questioned her, now nodding along like puppets. It was psychological warfare. She wanted to remind everyone. She was still in control, and it worked on some. Neighbors who had once clapped for me at the meeting now looked away when I waved. Fear returned, because fear is contagious. But I wasn't alone. Mark, the old veteran, stood by me. So did Mrs. Lopez, the one who saw her with the flashlight. And slowly, a small circle of us formed. We shared notes, compared letters, pieced together patterns. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She was spreading her war like poison across the cul-de-sac. And yet, the more she struck, the more desperate it looked. One night, my son and I were eating dinner when the Ring camera pinged. I opened the feed, and my stomach twisted. Spray paint, red letters across my garage door. Rule breaker. I rushed outside, neighbors gathering, whispers echoing in the night. Karen stood at the edge of the street, arms folded, watching. Not holding a can, not caught in the act, but her smirk said enough. I filed a police report. But the officers sighed, said without direct evidence they couldn't pin it on anyone. Karen knew exactly how far she could go without crossing the line that mattered. But every act of hers, every smear of paint, every broken mailbox, every false notice, it all built my case stronger. The folder grew thicker, and the thicker it grew, the less fear I felt. Because evidence is like firewood. The more you stack, the hotter the fire burns when it finally catches. Still, the stress weighed on me. Nights turned long, my son's grades slipped. I found myself staring out the window at midnight, searching for shadows. Karen had turned my home into a battlefield. And yet, the more she pushed, the more the cracks in her throne spread. One evening, Mark knocked on my door. He held a stack of papers in his hand. Old HOA records from years ago. "Look at this," he said. His finger tapped a page. A fine collected for a mailbox violation. But the money never recorded in the budget. Another page. A landscaping fee paid in cash, but no receipt filed. It wasn't just a pattern. It was theft, piece by piece. The Queen's empire was rotting from the inside. I knew what had to be done. This wasn't just about my lock anymore. This wasn't just about Karen harassing neighbors. This was about bringing her whole kingdom down. So we formed a plan, quietly, carefully. We gathered a group of neighbors who had suffered under her reign. We collected letters, receipts, fines that made no sense. Every piece of paper became a weapon. And then, we set the stage. Not at an HOA meeting, not on the sidewalk where she could brush it off, but in front of the very people she feared most. The county board that oversaw all HOAs in our district, the day of the hearing. My stomach churned. Karen arrived in her usual pink blouse, badge pinned proudly to her chest. She walked in like she owned the room, but she didn't see the stack of folders waiting at my side. When it was her turn, she spoke with confidence. She painted herself as a victim, a president, harassed by ungrateful homeowners. A woman unfairly targeted for doing her duty. Her words dripped with fake sincerity. And for a moment, I saw some of the officials nodding, but then, it was my turn. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I laid the folder on the table, page by page, violation by violation, fine by fine. And finally, the ring footage. The moment her key turned in my lock, the silence in that room was thicker than cement. Her words crumbled. Her mask cracked. Her empire shook. Karen tried to interrupt, tried to call it out of context. But the officials leaned forward, their eyes hard. One of them finally said, "We'll investigate this further." For the first time, she didn't have the last word. That night, she didn't walk tall. She left the building with her shoulders tight, her steps quick, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. But cornered animals are dangerous, and I knew she wasn't done, because when you strip power from someone who lives for it, they don't fade quietly. They burn, they claw, they drag everything down with them if they can. So I waited, I braced, I locked every window, checked every camera. Because Karen wasn't just fighting for her role anymore, she was fighting for her identity, and people who fight for that are the most dangerous of all. That night, lying in bed, my son asleep down the hall, I couldn't shake the question burning in my head: would Karen finally fall under the weight of her lies? Or would she destroy everything around her in her final attempt to keep her crown? The days after the hearing felt strange, like the calm before a storm. Karen wasn't on the sidewalks with her clipboard anymore. She wasn't knocking on doors, scribbling notes, handing out fines. For the first time in years, the queen of our HOA was silent. At first, the neighborhood breathed easier. Lawns grew without letters. Trash bins sat an extra day without warnings. The cul-de-sac felt almost normal, but I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She was planning, waiting, sharpening her knives in the dark. And then, the silence broke. It started with whispers. Neighbors telling me she was calling them late at night, pressuring them, threatening them. "If you don't stand with me, you'll regret it," she hissed down the line. One neighbor said she received an anonymous letter stuffed in her mailbox. "Think twice before siding with liars," it read. But the font, the tone, the venom, it was Karen. The tension bled into every corner of our cul-de-sac. Block parties stopped. Conversations ended quickly when she walked by. The kids who once played freely outside now stayed indoors because the neighborhood wasn't safe anymore. It was a battlefield, and every one of us was caught in her war. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with Mark and Mrs. Lopez, stacks of papers spread between us, violation letters, budget sheets, receipts with missing money. We were building a wall of proof, stronger than anything she could break. But Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "She's not just angry, she's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." And he was right, Because that very night, the stupid thing happened. The Ring camera pinged again. I opened the feed and froze. There she was, Karen, standing at my driveway in the dead of night. No clipboard, no badge, just her, holding a hammer. She crouched down, lifted it high, and smashed the side of my mailbox. The metal dented, the door bent sideways. Then she stepped back, breathing hard, her eyes darting toward the camera lens. She knew she was being watched. But she didn't care anymore. I called the police. This time, I had clear evidence. The officers came, watched the footage, shook their heads. It was undeniable now. Karen wasn't just a petty dictator. She was vandalizing property, breaking the law in broad daylight. But when they knocked on her door, she didn't even deny it. She told them I forged the footage, that I hacked the cameras to make her look guilty. The boldness of her lie stunned even the officers. But legally, the process would take time. Too much time. By the next morning, word had spread. Half the neighborhood stood on my lawn. Asking to see the footage, I plotted, eyed it for them. Gasps filled the air. Shock turned into anger, and anger turned into resolve. Neighbors who had once cowered now stood taller. They were tired of living under her reign of fear, tired of hiding, and for the first time, the street united. We filed a collective complaint. Not just me, not just Mark or Lopez. Everyone who had ever suffered a letter, a fine, or a late-night threat. Dozens of voices against one. The county board couldn't ignore it anymore. Karen must have felt the walls closing in, because the next HOA meeting, she showed up in full armor, pink blouse pressed sharp, badge shining under the fluorescent lights. She slammed the gavel like a war drum. "Order! Order!" she shouted. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned. She tried to twist the story, claimed the footage was doctored, claimed I was leading a smear campaign, claimed the neighbors were conspiring against her. She even pulled out fake letters, forged signatures from people who weren't even present. It was pathetic, but dangerous, because lies, when screamed loud enough, sometimes drown out truth, but not this time. Because one by one, my neighbors stood up. Mrs. Lopez told the board about the flashlight at my door. Mark spoke of years of silent theft. Others revealed their own letters, their own stories of intimidation. It wasn't just me anymore. It was everyone. Karen's face twisted. Her hands shook. The gavel slammed harder and harder until finally, she screamed, "This neighborhood is mine!" The room fell silent. Her voice echoed, sharp, unhinged, and in that moment, every mask she ever wore slipped away. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a president. She was a tyrant, desperate to hold on to power slipping through her fingers. The board members exchanged glances. One leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Karen, you're suspended pending full investigation." Her mouth fell open. Her eyes darted wildly across the room. She muttered, stumbled, then stormed out, heels clattering like gunfire against the tile. That night, the cul-de-sac felt lighter. Kids played outside again. Neighbors smiled as if the weight of years had finally lifted. But inside me, I couldn't rest. Because people like Karen don't disappear quietly. They wait. They plan. They look for one final move. And I was right. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed. The Ring camera again. This time, not just Karen, but a man with her. Both of them standing in my driveway. At 2 in the morning, the man held a crowbar. Karen pointed at my front door. My heart stopped. I grabbed my phone, called the police. But by the time sirens lit the street, they were gone, vanished into the night. The officers told me to stay alert, promised to patrol more often. But I knew this wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was dangerous. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house. My son's door closed down the hall. I couldn't let him see my fear, but it was there, heavy, choking, real, because Karen had nothing left to lose now, and that's when people are the most dangerous. The question clawed at my mind. How far would she go? Would she stop at vandalism, at threats, at midnight visits, or would she push further into something none of us could ever come back from? The night I saw her with that man, standing in my driveway with a crowbar, I knew the storm had reached its peak. This was no longer about rules or grass height or mailbox paint. This was personal. It was war. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made my heart pound. Every shadow through the blinds looked like her silhouette. I checked the locks twice, 3 times, even sat awake with a baseball bat across my lap. My son asked the question I had been avoiding. "Dad, are we safe?" I told him yes, but the truth hung heavy in the air, because with Karen, safety was no longer guaranteed. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the neighbors who still stood with me. Mark came. Mrs. Lopez came. 6 more sat in my living room. I showed them the footage of Karen and the man in the driveway. Their faces turned pale. "She's not just playing HOA anymore," Mark muttered, his voice rough. "She's gone off the rails." We all knew something had to be done. It wasn't enough to file letters, to whisper complaints, to hope the board would fix it. She had crossed the line into criminal, and if we didn't act fast, someone would get hurt. So we made a plan. We pooled our evidence. My folder of letters, the bank statements, the video clips. Neighbors contributed too. Screenshots of her threats, recordings of her late-night calls, even receipts from fines that vanished into her pocket. The pile grew so tall. It looked like a case file out of a crime drama, because that's what this was now. A crime. We contacted the county investigators directly. Not the board. Not the HOA office. Real authorities. We handed everything over. They listened carefully, their eyes widening with each page, each clip, each story. And finally one of them said the words I had been waiting for. "This is enough to open a formal case." Relief washed over me. But it was fragile, because investigations take time. And time was dangerous with Karen lurking in the shadows. She must have sensed the noose tightening, because her behavior turned even wilder. She drove slow past my house at midnight. Headlights off. She left notes on neighbors' cars, scrawled in sharp black ink, "Traitors don't last." One morning, Mrs. Lopez found her garden torn up, flowers ripped from the soil, dirt scattered like ashes. Karen was unraveling. And the more she unraveled, the more dangerous she became. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds. My son and I were watching a movie. When the doorbell rang, I checked the Ring camera, and my blood froze. Karen, standing at my front door, her blouse wrinkled, hair wild, eyes dark. No clipboard, no badge, just her, pounding on the door with her fist. "Open up," she screamed. Her voice echoed down the street. Neighbors peeked through their blinds. Some stepped out onto porches, everyone watching. She slammed her hand against the glass, yelling about rules, about betrayal, about how this neighborhood belongs to me. And then she pulled something from her pocket, a key, the same master key. She shoved it into the lock, twisted furiously. But this time, the lock didn't move, because after that first night, I had the locks changed. The sight of her twisting that useless key, growling in frustration, was like watching a tyrant stripped of her crown. She turned, saw the Ring camera pointed right at her, and for the first time, she didn't smirk. She didn't fake a smile. She screamed, a raw, furious scream that cut through the air. And then, flashing lights. 2 police cruisers pulled up. Sirens wailing, lights spinning red and blue across the cul-de-sac. Officers jumped out, pulled her away from the door. She kicked, shouted, spit, but they held firm. Neighbors poured into the street, whispering, gasping, some even cheering softly. The Queen had finally fallen. The investigation moved quickly after that. The stolen money, the falsified letters, the threats, the vandalism, all laid bare. Karen was removed from the HOA permanently. Charges were filed. Her reign was over. The neighborhood slowly healed, lawns still trimmed, mailboxes still neat. But this time, not out of fear, out of pride, people started waving again. Block parties returned. Kids laughed freely in the cul-de-sac. The shadow lifted. As for me, I finally slept through the night. The Ring camera still blinked at the front door. But now it was just precaution. My son stopped asking if we were safe, because we both knew the danger had passed. And yet, sometimes, when I walked down the street at dusk, I feel the echo of her eyes on me, the memory of her smirk, her threats, her scream at my door. It reminds me of one truth. Power doesn't create monsters. It reveals them. And I'll never forget the day the monster at my door held a master key. So now I ask you, if you caught someone like Karen, your own neighbor, trying to open your lock with a key they should never have, would you forgive once the storm was over, or would you never trust them again, no matter what?